Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this conference. As you've already heard, I'm Derfel Owen. I'm Multimedia and Student Engagement Manager at the Quality Assurance Agency. I'm not entirely sure what all of that means, but until a few weeks ago I was the Student Engagement person at QAA. So any thoughts and ideas would be welcome. So my interest, as Janice said at the beginning, my interest here came originally. I was invited to speak at a conference here, and I heard about the change agents. I was really impressed by what you were doing, and then I was drawn into the Change Academy and so on. So I've had quite a lot of involvement with the Change Agents project here. And what I want to talk about today, my notes, is this idea. It was interesting to hear James talking a second ago about how do we see students? What's our perspective of students? How are we going to treat students? And what I want to talk a bit about today, there are elements of that, but I also want to talk about how do students see themselves? What do students want to be? And I've spent a great deal of time talking to various people, and William mentioned think pieces that have been published by QAA, which I coordinated. And those were looking at this issue of student consumerism. How do students see themselves? How can they behave in different environments? And a very strong feeling, I think, from the higher education sector, that they don't want to see that sort of consumerist relationship with students. And I tend to agree with that. I don't think it'll work. It's not because I think there's anything wrong with consumerism, I just don't think it works in the higher education context. And this is why. I think if you're buying a product, if you're going to buy this glass, for example, you can go and buy it, and if it doesn't work, if it doesn't hold water, then you can take it back, you can get an alternative. If it doesn't look quite the way it looked on the packaging when you bought it, you can take it back to the shop, point it out, and they will give you your money back or give you an alternative. If you immerse yourself in higher education, if you go to an institution, you can't come to the end of your year, 2, 3, 4, however long years, and then come back to the University of Exeter and say, do you know what, I'm not happy with myself, can you give me another me, please? That's not going to work, that relationship, it just can't work that way, and that is why consumerism is not, I think, an appropriate way to run higher education, and that's very much the feeling I've had from the discussions I've been having in the sector. So why did I want to talk about this under this heading today? And that's because I think in the new context that we're moving into, where students are going to be paying a great deal of money, that relationship, that concept of I'm paying £9,000 and I want and deserve a service for it, I am a consumer of something, it's actually quite straightforward. It taps into quite a powerful and deeply understood concept of relationships between two parties. And so what I want to try and get across today, and what I hope I'll be able to communicate and you will take away from this, is if we don't want this consumer relationship, if we don't want to get into the cycle of student pays, university provides service, student complains, you resolve complaints, student complaints again, and resolve complaints and resolution cycle, then you have to present a positive, constructive, engaging alternative to that. There's no point in just telling a student, you're not a consumer, I don't want you to be a consumer. And you can have some really good ideas about what the alternative is. It's a very well-argued case. But if that doesn't feel like the reality for the students, then you're going to face quite a big challenge. Now, I wanted to show this slide because it's something I was quite keen for Janice to show earlier, but she didn't have time. But I think it's really important. Janice was touching on this when she was talking about the engaged and active students you have at the University of Exeter. Now, I saw this, someone showed me these slides, I think it was Simon who showed me the slide a few days ago, and I was really impressed by it. If you look at these figures, the amount of engagement, the actively engaged and interested students, not only does Exeter produce, but actually recruits in the first place. Across the board, it's really impressive. I think it would be quite easy to look at those sorts of statistics and pat yourselves on the back and say, well, we have engaged students at the University of Exeter, we're doing very well, and you are doing very well. The examples we saw earlier, we don't need to worry about the consumer sort of relationship. What I would say to you is think very carefully before you make that sort of assumption. These people are engaged, they're active, and they're energised. They're the types of people who will be vocal. They're manifesting that by getting more to societies, being student representatives. They could just as easily manifest that by setting up a witch magazine at the University of Exeter and becoming consumers and focusing that energy in that sort of way. So that's why I'm making the case that you need to think very carefully, not just about presenting an alternative, but delivering an alternative for students as well. So, what's the alternative? I think the change agents, I think there are others. There are other ways you can manage that relationship with students, but the Change Agents initiative is very powerful, very well thought through, and something that you've begun here at the University of Exeter, that if you take it to the next level, will be really impressive and will present that compelling alternative to students. But I think in order for that to succeed, you need 4 things. You need to respect students, you need to understand them, you need to empower students, and you need to trust students to take the initiative and take that forward. I'm going to talk through those 4 areas. And in my presentations, I've spoken here before, those who seem like I do use videos and so on quite a lot, so do bear with me if that's okay, and it gives me a chance to get a glass of water as well. Okay, so respect. What do I mean by that? Here's a picture I got off the internet. And the reason I got this is I'm going to talk about my mum. And that isn't my mum. When I tapped in mother into Google, that came up. I have no idea why, but that's what came up. And the reason I want to show is because I had a moment. There's like the Archimedes in the back. I was at the Hayes Book Festival with my mum, and we were queuing up to get some ice cream, and she was getting really frustrated because people were jumping the queue, people were getting in, changing their minds, and taking ages of light. And she started saying, "Why can't people be more like me? I'm so logical. I'm so perfect in everything I do. I know what I want. Why can't people in this queue behave like me?" And my view was actually, thankfully, it's because they're not like you. They're quite different to you. Everybody does things in their own different ways. They've got their own priorities and so on. We can't do things the way we used to. And I want to show a brief video just to sort of warm you up a bit to this, just after the post-lunch session. But I'll explain a bit more what I mean by this and what it might mean in this context. This is the 4 Yorkshiremen. Just a slight post-lunch warm-up there. It's very funny, and I think apart from all of the content, it's also John Cleese's Yorkshire accent. But what's the message? What's the point? Why did I want to show you that? Well, I think you often come across people, that's what I mean about respecting students, and you often hear, you may find yourself saying it yourself sometimes, maybe some colleagues saying it, "Oh, students just aren't doing things the right way anymore. They're not doing things like I used to. They're not enjoying themselves in the same way. Why are they having sit-ins at universities?" As I used to say until a couple of weeks ago. But you hear that often. Students aren't doing things the way we want to. Well, that's because they're not like us. Even me, who had my student experience a few years ago, you had your student experiences a few years before that. They're not like that, and they won't be again. Different generations have different attitudes and different perspectives and different needs. They're not missing out on the same experiences. You might think, oh, they're missing out, they're not doing things the way they do. They don't want the same experiences, they want different experiences. They want to do different things that suit them, that suit their different generation. They have different expectations, desires and principles to what you might have. And different generations, as I said, will have different perspectives. I think it's very important to respect that and respect the fact that students don't have the same sort of perspectives, expectations and attitudes as you might have had or you might expect that they would have. So that leads me on to the next bit I want to talk about, which is about understanding your students. So on your desks in front of you, you'll see bits of green and orange paper. I'm a bit colourblind, so some of you I think have peach rather than green paper, but you know what I mean, one is lighter than the other. I've got a few statements that I'm going to put up, and they're drawn from the National Union of Students' Students' Experience Survey, which they conduct every year. Pretty comprehensive, and this focuses on undergraduate students across the UK. So these questions are not about Exeter students per se. Exeter students will have taken part, it's not just about them, it's about UK-wide. And there's some statements in here that I'm going to ask you to show your green or red card if it's true or false. So the first one, 65% of final year students work part-time to fund their studies. If that's true or false? Green is true, red is false. I think that there's a smattering of false, but the true has it. False. It's only 40% of final year students. Students spend £233 on average per week. That's excluding tuition fees. Everything else, accommodation, the job lot, everything other than tuition fees. True or false? It's about half and half, I think. but I think false edges it there. That's true. £233 on average students spend. Now, final couple of questions. 78% of students surveyed by the NUS said that they thought the amount of contact time they received was not appropriate for their course. True or false? That's a bit of a mix again, but true has it, I think. Far from it. Only 15% of students, only 15% of students said they are not happy with the amount of contact time they receive. And that really struck me actually when I read it. We obsess over contact hours in higher education. We have endless policy discussions about it. But actually, as far as students are concerned, 78% of them, quite the opposite of that, are content with their contact hours. So that's a really fascinating statistic and something to reflect on. Finally, 91% of students, this is not the NSS survey, this is the NUS survey, rate the quality of their students' experience as excellent or good. True or false? True. Yeah, well done. But that's the one where you got right. And I think that's worth bearing in mind, actually. And I think it's terrific, actually, to work in a higher education sector, or any sector, actually, that gets those sorts of statistics. That level of satisfaction, excellent or good, but still wants to do better. Still doesn't think that's good enough and wants to do better. I think that's really reassuring. The reason I've shown those is to try and challenge you and question you. I think the responses we got question some of your assumptions and your understandings of students. I think it's really important, if we're going to develop a better relationship with students, a relationship that isn't based on consumerism, we need to understand them better and not have assumptions about their behaviours. And I'm going to show this graph again, because I think if we don't understand the types of students we have, I want to reinforce this message. I think it's a good set of statistics, but if we don't understand the students, what's motivating them, what's driving them, we are going to fail to create the sort of culture that we want. The other thing I want to, which tips back into the respect thing, is about generation gaps. I think this was highlighted a second ago. Some of you may have seen these sorts of concepts before. And this is how the generations post-Second World War are broken down. You have the silent generation who were very affected by the Second World War, lived through age of austerity, and that seriously affected their behaviour. The baby boomers, their behaviour was very much a response to the silent generation. They were trying to break free of those sorts of cultures. Then you have Generation X, who lived through a big time of change. Again, they were responding to the previous generation by actually trying to behave a bit differently. And then finally, Generation Y. And these are the 18 to 21-year-olds, that sort of generation, people in their mid-20s and younger now, people who are going to be coming to the University of Exeter soon. That's why I think it's important to understand a bit more about them. There's about 20 years. So Generation Y, I like showing that cartoon to begin with. Use this. What are their driving values? What shapes these people? They tend to be optimistic, they're very self-confident, they have high self-esteem, they're networkers, and they're a generation of contradictions as well. They're very focused on ethical consumption, but at the same time, they are quite consumerist in their approach. So they will preach about global warming and so on, but they will use their mobile phones, and as soon as a new one comes out of Apple, the old one's in the bin, and they'll buy the new one. So there's a lot of contradiction in this generation, but it's something that we're going to have to deal with. This generation is shaped. You can't change them now that they're here. And what do I think are two key points to bear in mind about this generation? First of all, Nelson Mandela has always been free. It's never been an issue. It's a big campaigning issue for all previous generations. Not an issue. It doesn't matter to this generation. He's a cuddly old man who appears on TV and says nice things. Berlin Wall has never existed. Always been gone. Not an issue for this generation. But what's really shaped them, I think, is what's illustrated by these two things here. First of all, money. Since the mid-1990s until very recently, and what has shaped this generation, continuous economic growth. Pretty affluent growth in society, money becoming more and more freely available. If you wanted a job, you could get a job. Credit was freely available. If they wanted access to money to buy something, they could get it. And that's not just a practical thing, that's really shaped their mentality, their attitude. If they want something, they can get it. Quite easily, quite straightforward. The second thing is about technological development and access to information. very rapid change and growth in this area as well, particularly the access to information. If this generation wants access to information about anything, they can tap it into the internet and have access to it in seconds. Even those of you in the audience, with the statistics I was showing a second ago, you could have looked it up on the US website and told me I was wrong. That's how quickly they can access information. And that's not just a fact of life for them, it's shaped their behaviours, it's shaped their attitudes to the world, and they expect those sorts of things from the institutions that they're engaging with, including their universities. And quite a profound difference in change, and a very challenging sort of attitude for the students. Okay, I want to show another brief video now, which was from Kansas State University. Some of you may have seen this before, it's been doing the rounds for quite a while, but I still think it's really relevant in terms of the issues it captures from some of the students. That was an American university. If you look at it, it looks like a traditional white 18 to 21-year-old student contributing to that. So with all those sorts of caveats attached to it, I still think the messages are very powerful, particularly the fact that it was students who come up with the messages in there. So what are the key things they were coming up with? Consumerism. That was clearly in there. I pay £100 for textbooks that I never opened. Well, why? Why are they asked to pay to buy these books? That incredulity that their neighbour had paid for class but doesn't turn up. Well, why would they do that? This question, I think this one's really important. I read 40%. I read 49% of my allocated reading, but only 26% of it is relevant to my life. Students constantly evaluating what impact is this having on me? How is this shaping my experience? How is it making me a better employee, a better person for the future? How am I going to use it in the future? Constantly making those sorts of judgments. $20,000, well, I suppose we wish that would be the situation now. Less personalised. Both of these, I think, would be familiar. Only 18% of my lecturers know my name. My average class size is 150. In some instances, much larger than that. Time poor and other commitments. So you may say it's time poor, you might actually think that they're just multitaskers. All of these issues collected together added up to 26.5 hours a day. And some things that were left out, I thought, were what if they've got kids they've got to look after? What if they're commuting a long distance into the institution? What if they're working at the same time as studying? And even simple things like what if they spend 3 days waiting for a library book to be returned before they can actually use it. Those things weren't included in there, and they're also precious. And finally, this point, and I want to move on to show a bit more about this in a second, new technology and developments. This is the point I was making a second ago. And I think this actual video, this is where it shows how old it is. This year I read 8 books, 2,300 websites, 1,200 are Facebook profiles. That's probably higher. No mention of Twitter in there, no mention of Wikipedia, the use of those sorts of media, but very much part of the culture of students. I write 42 pages for this class, 500 emails. How well is that reflected in the learning and teaching styles and the support that's available for students? When you have long reading lists, how many blogs, podcasts, websites and so on does it include, or does it just include access to journals and books and so on? Question, something to consider. And finally, this other point, which I think is really important and worth reflecting on. When I graduate, I'll probably have a job that doesn't exist today. I think this is where change agents becomes really important, actually. Students are very conscious of the fact that they might be choosing to go on a course, they might be choosing to set themselves on a trajectory, but within a year, things may change. The bottom might fall out of the career they've decided to go for, and they need to change and do something different. They might change their minds. A whole new area of the economy might grow that they're interested in and want to move into. How flexible are institutions to respond to that and give students opportunities to shape their learning so that even during their study, once they've chosen an institution in their course, they're actually able to make changes that meet that. I want to show another video now, which is a bit long, so I'll probably stop this one about halfway through, but I think it captures very well the speed and rapidity of change that we're witnessing at the moment. What that was showing was not long evolutionary change. That was capturing changes that were happening in the last 2 or 3 years. Things like Twitter, they were talking about, didn't even exist 4 years ago, but now they're so deeply ingrained in the way Generation Y behaves, the generation who are going to be coming through are already here, if you like. They've already permeated the institution like the enemy within. 96% of them use social media regularly. It's just a way of life for them. It's not something that's alien to the way they behave themselves. So the points I've been trying to make there is about understanding your students, understanding how they behave and responding to it, respecting it. So the respect and understand, they're two sides of the same coin. You need to understand your students and you need to appreciate that that is how they are. Because if you try to rally against it, change their behaviours, you're in danger of tipping yourselves into that consumer relationship, where those energised students that I talked about will actually start focusing their energy in that complaint consumerism sort of cycle. So if you want to do something different, you need to focus on that. So the other area I wanted to look at was about empowering students. Do students want to engage? Bearing in mind everything we just looked at, and we think, God, they've got so many things to do. They don't really want to engage with this institution. I'm looking at the NUS survey here again. And they asked two questions in this. And if you take out the fence sitters and don't knows, they asked the question, how involved do you want to be in shaping your curriculum? 79% of students, so if you take out the sort of fence sitters, said they're inclined to being involved. They want to be involved in shaping their curriculum. Count them down when walking around campus. 4 out of every 5. Only 31%, when asked the question, how involved do you feel you are in shaping your curriculum, only 31% feel as though they are. A massive gap. We're missing out on something there somewhere. So what sorts of opportunities are we providing for that 79%? And here I'm drawing on the research that William talked about earlier, and also some research that was done for the Funding Council in Wales, which explored what opportunities universities are asked, what opportunities do you provide for students to engage. These are sorts of things that came up: staff-student liaison committees, faculty boards, university senate, programme validation committees, internal audit groups, and so on. Students get opportunities to sit on those sorts of things. And that's good, that's excellent. Very pleased to see that sort of stuff, especially from QAA, I would argue that that's internal audits and so on, very important in student involvement. But that's clearly satisfying 30% odd of students. 48% out of that 80 odd don't feel half of them, don't feel as though it's good. So what do they mean by getting involved in shaping their curriculum? They want to, but they don't get the opportunity. What's one of the things, it might be just as simple as having a decent range of modules to choose between. That's shaping your curriculum. And almost every university gives that sort of opportunity to students. But how are you packaging that and how are you presenting that to students? Is it a burden, something they've got to do, or is it presented as an opportunity to shape your curriculum, make choices, do those things that I was talking about earlier, which is preparing yourself for those future jobs as something that exists? Having dialogue about assessment, talking to your tutors and lecturers about what the learning outcomes are and how the assessment can be shaped to meet your needs, and can that be changed and shaped during the course study. Big challenges about procedurally making that happen, but it might be what some students mean. Providing group feedback to each other, activities such as change agents, having opportunities to change the learning and teaching environment of the institution, even things like employability, creating opportunities to shape their learning whilst they're at an institution. It may not be accredited stuff, but it may be something that they feel is actually shaping their learning whilst they're here and preparing them for those jobs that they don't know exist yet, that they feel very conscious to do. I think we've got to think very hard, and this is the trap that a lot of institutions fall into when they think about student engagement and they want to create these cultures. We'll create student places on committees and so on, but actually we're clearly missing out as institutions. And lots of other students, and someone was making the point earlier, will think about their experience in terms of their course, their subject, their modules, and what they're doing and how that's been shaped to respond to them. So I think there are diverse approaches, and from what I can see, some of you may have seen this model before. But what I see is 4 tiers of student engagement. First of all, we have the level of monitoring, which is a one-way discussion with students. A bit like what James was talking about a second ago, where the senior management of the institution may decide they want to do something, and they'll consult with students, might do a survey or refer to NSS results and so on to draw on that sort of evidence. It's very much one way. The institution gathers information and they do something with it. It's not really engaging the students in what the solution is going to be. Second tier, which I actually think this is probably the most pernicious of all. The other levels actually all have their place, I think. But this is where there's an observer, where students are invited to participate in discussion, but actually all they do is observe. Decisions are made and they're there, but they're not actually contributing to them, and they're not contributing to the delivery of them. See that in the institution quite a lot. Then there is the students as experts, where students take full participation in decision making. They're invited to be present, and they're fully consulted and fully involved and take ownership of the decisions, and the decisions are then treated as collective decisions about the institution. I think this is broadly, institutions are somewhere, most in their culture and practices are somewhere between observer and expert. And there's probably some variability within, and some are better than others within institutions. Finally, there's the stage of partnership. And I think this is the question that you asked a second ago of James, I think sort of captures some of this. Sometimes this element of partnership is where you have joint decision making and delivery, where students are treated as change agents, as owners of their education, they have full involvement in decision making. The difference here is that they're responsible for delivery as well. And when you're talking about partnership, that can manifest itself in different ways at different times. Sometimes, as with a students' guild or students' union, it will mean students taking full, complete ownership of something and doing it. Other instances, it may mean a more balanced approach, where there's a little bit of both, institution, managers, students and academics, and other times it may mean students taking a less high-profile role, but actually being actively involved and brought into the decision-making, depending on their expertise. But that's the nature of partnership. That's how it works. And that's where I think a lot of institutions are trying to move towards, and that's the sort of culture you need to create, the partnership culture, if you're going to achieve what you want to achieve with the change agents initiative. Finally, what I wanted to talk about was trust. I'm only going to show a few seconds of this. There's a brief video I want to show from the University of Yale. Some of you might see it. Some of you, this institution might consider Yale a comparator institution. I'm sure Yale would consider itself arguably the best university in the world. And I want to show you a recruitment video that was produced by the University of Yale and talk a little bit about it afterwards. That goes on for 16 minutes. How many of you, if you were choosing to go to university, would have chosen to go on to Yale on the basis of that? I would have done. But yeah, it goes on to it even goes right to a sort of very terrific crescendo at the Grease style. It's terrific. Really enjoy it. But actually, it's fine. None of you put your hands up, you would have chosen to go to Yale. Good, because it wasn't meant to appeal to any of you. And that's why they came together with it. So my suggestion here, I'm not suggesting that you select QAA the musical or Exeter the musical. That's not what I'm attempting to do here. Why did the University of Yale choose this? I know I'm running out of time. I've got about a minute left, and I will finish on time. Why did it choose to do this? Because it trusted its students. What the University of Yale did said, we have a problem. We have probably 10, 15 applicants per place. We don't have a recruitment issue, but we need to diversify. We need to reach out to different groups of students. And they thought, well, we could commission some marketing people to do it. No, we're going to trust our students. They asked, all of that video was done, it was written, filmed, edited, distributed by students at the University of Yale. They trusted them, because those students would know what other students wanted. They were thinking about students who were seriously considering university at the age of 16, probably being pressurised by their parents from the age of 10, and the current obsession in America, same as it is in the UK, or me, with Glee, High School the Musical, and so on. And the very, very core of it was about students talking to students in a style that suits students, not a style that suits anybody else. I want to reinforce the point, this was the University of Yale. It doesn't need to do this, but it chose to, and it chose to trust its students. And that's the key point. Ultimately, they trusted the judgment and professionalism of their students to be able to put something like that together. Think about it. Sometimes there may be some big decisions. This Change Agents initiative, taken to its extreme, taken to its biggest possible benefit, will involve students perhaps researching, making decisions and making recommendations about some pretty big strategic issues. If that's going to work, you need to trust their judgment. In the same way that you would tell employers, the University of Exeter students are excellent and you make good employees, you need to trust them and put that trust in them so that they know, so they're able to communicate that to others. So those are the 4 key things. Sorry, I'm now running over. It's Respecting your students, understanding your students, empowering your students, and trusting that your students to make the right decisions for them and to inform other students. I'm not sure we have time for questions.
No time.